Good evening, and welcome to BNN, Brief News Network. I'm your host, and we are keeping a very close eye on a number of developing stories this hour. But first, some major breaking news just coming into our newsroom, and this one is significant. We are now learning that a United States Special Forces soldier has been formally charged with making more than $400,000 by placing bets on whether or not Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro would be removed from office. And here is where the story gets deeply troubling. According to the federal indictment that was just unsealed within the last half hour, this officer, an active duty member of the United States military, did not just know about the operation in advance. He actually participated in the planning and execution of it. And federal prosecutors allege that he then used that classified, sensitive information to personally and deliberately profit from a series of online prediction market bets. Let that sink in for a moment. A soldier with access to one of the most closely guarded military operations in recent American history allegedly decided to turn that knowledge into a personal payday. More than $400,000. Now, before we get into the specifics of the charges, let's quickly remind ourselves of what we are actually talking about here, because the underlying military operation is itself extraordinary. You will recall that Nicolás Maduro, the long-standing and deeply controversial president of Venezuela, along with his wife, was captured during a nighttime raid on the Venezuelan capital of Caracas by United States forces in early January of this year. It was a stunning, unprecedented operation. The kind of mission that most people would have called unthinkable just years ago. Maduro and his wife are now facing federal drug trafficking charges in the United States. Both have entered pleas of not guilty. That operation, its planning, its timing, its execution, was among the most sensitive and tightly classified pieces of intelligence that existed inside the United States military at that time. And according to federal prosecutors, one soldier allegedly decided that information was his ticket to financial gain. The individual at the center of this indictment has been identified as Gannon Ken Van Dike. Van Dike is a member of the United States Special Forces. And not just any unit. According to the indictment, he reports directly to JSOC. That is the Joint Special Operations Command, the most elite, most secretive, and most operationally sensitive branch of the entire United States Special Operations community. JSOC is the command responsible for the most sensitive and consequential military missions that the United States carries out. Its personnel are among the most trusted individuals in the entire United States Armed Forces. They are entrusted with information that most people in government will never see. And according to this indictment, Van Dike used his position within that command and the classified knowledge that came with IT to place a series of calculated bets on the prediction market platform Polymarket. We have reached out to Polymarket for comment on this story. As of this broadcast, we are still awaiting their response. We will bring you that statement the moment it arrives. So, how did this allegedly unfold? Let's walk through what the indictment describes. Gannon Van Dike was, according to federal prosecutors, actively involved in the planning process for the Maduro operation as far back as December 8th of last year. Remember, the actual raid on Caracas took place just after the new year. So for weeks before that operation was carried out, Van Dike allegedly already knew what was coming. And as the planning evolved, because the timeline and parameters of this operation did shift over the weeks leading up to IT, Van Dike's betting patterns allegedly shifted along with it. Each time the operation was adjusted, each time the timeline moved, his bets reportedly moved too. That, on its own, is extraordinarily damning, because it suggests that this wasn't a lucky guess. This wasn't someone following the news closely and making an educated wager. The alignment between the shifting details of a classified military operation and the shifting nature of his bets is precisely what caught the attention of investigators. And it did catch their attention immediately. The bets were, by any standard, outsized. The kind of wager that flags automatically in any system designed to monitor for unusual or suspicious activity. The profit, over $400,000, was not a modest gain. It was the result of someone who, prosecutors allege, knew with a high degree of certainty how a major geopolitical and military event was going to unfold. But here is another layer to this story that is just as significant as the betting itself. According to the indictment, Van Dike didn't simply log on and place his bets from his home computer. He allegedly used a VPN, a virtual private network, in an apparent attempt to conceal his internet activity and mask his digital footprint. For those unfamiliar with the technology, a VPN reroutes your internet connection through servers in other locations, making it far more difficult for investigators or platforms to trace activity back to a specific individual or device. The fact that Van Dike allegedly took that precaution is significant for two reasons. First, it suggests awareness, an understanding that what he was doing was wrong, and a deliberate effort to avoid detection. And second, it suggests premeditation. This was not an impulsive decision made in a moment of poor judgment. This appears, according to prosecutors, to have been a calculated and deliberate scheme. The indictment also makes clear that Van Dike was acutely aware that he was handling what is known as sensitive compartmented information, or SCI. This is among the highest and most restricted classifications that exist within the United States intelligence and military community. It is the kind of information that is shared only on an absolute need-to-know basis. And according to federal prosecutors, he allegedly chose to weaponize it for personal financial gain. Now, let's talk about what Gannon Van Dike is actually facing under this indictment, because the legal jeopardy here is severe. As of this broadcast, Van Dike has not yet appeared in court. No plea has been entered. As is standard in federal cases of this nature, he is presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty. But the charges themselves carry extraordinary weight. On the wire fraud charge alone, just that one count, Van Dike faces a potential maximum sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. But there is something else in this indictment that legal experts and financial regulators are already paying very close attention to this evening. And that is the inclusion of a commodities fraud charge. And this is where this case becomes something much larger than just one soldier's alleged misconduct. Here is the broader legal implication that every person who has ever placed a bet on Polymarket or any similar prediction market platform needs to understand tonight. By charging commodities fraud in connection with activity on Polymarket, federal prosecutors, specifically the Southern District of New York, which is widely regarded as the most powerful and experienced federal prosecutor's office in the country when it comes to financial crime, are effectively treating Polymarket as if it were the New York Stock Exchange, or the NASDAQ, or the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. In other words, in the eyes of the Southern District of New York, placing an inside bet on a prediction market platform using privileged, non-public information is no different, legally, than trading on insider information in the stock market. The implications of that legal theory cannot be overstated. For years, prediction markets like Polymarket have operated in a somewhat ambiguous regulatory space. They were treated by many as novelties, interesting financial instruments, perhaps, but not the kind of serious, regulated markets where the full weight of federal securities and commodities law would apply. Tonight, that ambiguity is gone. Or at least, it is under serious legal challenge. The Southern District of New York has effectively put the entire prediction market industry on notice. If you have access to non-public, material information, whether that is classified government intelligence, corporate inside knowledge, or any other form of privileged access, and you use that information to place bets on a prediction market platform, Federal prosecutors are now prepared to treat that as insider trading. Full stop. This is not a position that appeared out of nowhere tonight. U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton, who serves as the top federal prosecutor here in the Southern District of New York, spoke publicly about exactly this concern in a recent appearance on CNBC. Clayton made clear that, as far as his office is concerned, there is very little meaningful legal distinction between exploiting insider knowledge on the stock market and exploiting insider knowledge on a prediction market platform. And tonight's indictment of Gannon Van Dike is, in many ways, the first major test case for that legal theory. If prosecutors succeed, if they are able to convince a federal jury that betting on Polymarket using classified military intelligence constitutes commodities fraud, the consequences for the entire prediction market industry could be transformative. The aperture for potential prosecutions widens dramatically. Anyone who has ever used material, non-public information to profit on one of these platforms now has reason to be very concerned. So let's step back for a moment and look at the big picture here, because there are really two separate but deeply connected stories unfolding in this indictment tonight. The first is the story of an individual, a highly trusted, highly cleared member of the United States Special Forces, who is alleged to have betrayed that trust in an extraordinarily brazen way. Not by passing secrets to a foreign adversary, not by leaking classified documents to the press, but by allegedly using the most sensitive information in the United States government's possession to make money on an online betting platform. The audacity of that, if proven, is difficult to fully comprehend. The second story is bigger and more far-reaching. It is the story of how the United States government, and specifically the Southern District of New York, is drawing a hard line around the prediction market industry, treating it with the same legal seriousness as the traditional financial markets that have been regulated for decades. Both of those stories matter enormously. And tonight, they are colliding in a single federal indictment. Gannon Van Dike has not appeared in court. No plea has been entered. He is presumed innocent, but the charges he faces, up to 20 years on wire fraud alone, plus commodities fraud, represent the full weight of the federal government bearing down on an individual who, prosecutors allege, chose personal profit over his oath, his mission, and his country. We will continue to follow this story as it develops. The moment we receive a response from Polymarket, we will bring it to you. And as Van Dike's case moves through the federal court system, BNN will be there every step of the way. I'm your anchor here at BNN, Brief News Network. Stay with us. We've got more breaking news still ahead.